record, Jerry Allen interviewing Susan King on March 13th, 2010 in Sherry Gocke's studio in Los Angeles, California in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you. In the early 1970s, I was in graduate school in Las Cruces, New Mexico with Christina Cruzet. And Cheryl Swanick had been there as a student, which is how I ended up getting there, because friends of mine went there and said, "You'd love this place." But by the time I got there, Cheryl was in graduate school in Oklahoma. So Christy was another graduate student with me. And we had to do something for our art history requirement as grad students. And the art history guy said, he was very much into sort of historical modes, and he said, "Why don't you do some research on ceramics, painted china figurines?" And I looked at him and I said, "Have you even seen my work?" And Christy and I got into a discussion about what we'd really like to do is teach a class on women in art. So we taught one of the first classes in the country in Las Cruces, New Mexico in 1972. It's probably spring of 73, I guess, spring of 73. And that was our art history requirement. And Christy had come from Baltimore, and she knew about Judy Chicago. And I remember seeing this little article, I think it was in Time magazine, about a woman house. And it's a long story, but we got hold of some money, and we invited Judy Chicago to come to our school. And she came for 3 days. She said she would come and do a lecture, a workshop, and she wanted $750 and a color TV in her motel room and a steak dinner. So Judy was actually recruiting people to come to the Feminist Studio Workshop. She gave a lecture and showed, I think the first slide on the screen was red flag with the tampon. And this is Las Cruces, New Mexico, a cowboy school. And she said cut, 45 times or something. I mean, people were on the floor. And there was kind of big time passive aggressive fallout from that. And I just thought after that, I can't stay here. And I didn't know how I was going to physically and financially get to LA, but Christy just said, "I'm going." And Cheryl said, "I'm going too." And I said, "Well, I can't be left out. I'm not staying here." I sort of knew it was important to be in the first year of the program because it was so much just being formed. So we packed up everything at the end of that summer and moved to Los Angeles, the three of us. We got this letter saying, well, it wasn't just going to be the Feminist Studio Workshop, it was going to be a building. They were going to have a public building, and I said, what in the hell are they doing in Los Angeles? Because I knew it was going to be this huge amount of work. And we had signed up to come and to find a space and be in a workshop with 30 other women and do our artwork. Instead, we came and fixed up this whole building. It was very hard, but it was really exciting. I learned how to, mud sheetrock and do a bunch of stuff, and it was hard. And I think later, I've thought since then, I come from, my background is teaching missionaries, so hey, I was up for it, it was just like, let's build another community, except it wasn't the Methodist Church, it was feminist art, it's just get in there and do the work. And I think it was really important that I had come from out of state. All my eggs were in this basket. It was just like I had really moved here to be part of this. And I think for those of us that did, it was sort of our whole deal because we didn't have family and friends that were here. Everything we did was focused around the Women's Building. The opening was when was the opening? I've already forgotten. November, December, or somewhere around in there. November 28th? And after that was over, we were just we were all exhausted. I mean, we were just horribly exhausted, and it sort of got rolling the next spring. There were hardly any classes. I mean, everything was just incredibly fragmented. It got to be much more ordered and sort of methodical the next year, but it was just sort of, these classes would sort of pop up and people would do something for a while, but it was so much different a few years later when there was a whole program in place. I met Michelle Court, who was working at Women's Space, and Women's Space was in the death throes. They had a fundraiser with Francoise Gillot, Picasso's wife, and they had valet parking, and we were just sort of rolling on the floor that they were having valet parking at this fundraiser because Women's Space had $2.50 in the bank. And the fundraiser just made enough money to cover their debts, I think. And that was the end of Women's Space. I mean, it's just like they couldn't go on, they didn't have any money. But a lot of the energy from that had been put into other things. So Michelle was floating around the building after that. She had her degree in arts management, and she and I decided to start a film series. So, I mean, we could just do things like that. And I think that's why I knew it was important to be part of the first year, because it was so malleable. I mean, everything was just so new. You could sort of just do, if you had an idea and you could do it, you could make it a reality. And that was just really exciting. I haven't gotten over that. It's really hard for me to work in institutions now because they don't work that way. Women's Space was gone, but Grandview Gallery was there. There were 2 shows every month. There was a public gallery, 707. They were on a monthly schedule. And for a while, we were like having to come up with 3 shows a month that we had to put together and open, which was insane. I came doing ceramics. I did barely anything in ceramics after I got here. We built a kiln, which we fired once. It was over. It's like the past was over. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I got interested in working with Sheila de Bretteville. And I think Sheila is really the reason I stayed in LA, because I found so much. I started making books, and it was a whole other area. My first book was called Letter Portfolio, and it was about how everybody at the Women's Building was keeping one journal about something in their lives. Meg Harlan was keeping about 5. And she would run from room to room. We were gallery sitters together. She would come into the gallery with this armful of journals just tumbling over. And she had her food journal and her work journal, I don't know. And so Sheila said to us with this project, why don't you make a poster? Sheila was always having these book classes, but they were always about making posters because that's what Sheila liked. So Sheila said, why don't you make a poster? Maybe you could use something from your journal. And I thought, oh, more journal stuff. So I just thought, no, I'm doing something about letter writing and how it's more of a correspondence, and I could write somebody something and get something back. And so it was all about writing letters, how my life was chronicled, not in journals, but in these letters that were sent back and forth across the country. I really wanted to work with women artists. I was sick. I had come from a really macho sculpture department at the University of Kentucky, and ceramics was pretty macho at that time, and I just really wanted to work with women, and I wanted to be able to do things without somebody taking the tools out of my hands and showing me how to do it better. So I really came as an artist, but I also wanted a sense of community. And Judy Chicago would talk about things like, get the best studio you can, use the best materials you can, and it was all with this idea that what we did mattered and that it was going to be permanent. Helen had come from CalArts. She'd been a student of Sheila's in the Feminist Art program, and I think she'd run presses there. And she came in as part of the program in the second year when more people were hired, and set up the Women's Graphic Center. And we bought an old print shop, a letterpress print shop, and an offset press that was made by a helicopter company, Rotoprint, and the offset press was just horrible to run, but we sort of carried on some of the things that had been done at CalArts, but in a much different scope of inviting people to come and print things and take classes in the extension program at the Women's Building, which got a lot of outside people to come in. And then much later, through work that Sue did and other people, we had grants to invite 100 people to come and make a postcard and things like that. But that was really exciting. It was really exciting to have that equipment and try to figure out how to use it. And we invited a lot of women from Northern California over time to come down and teach workshops. I think the first woman, Bonnie Carpenter, taught a business card workshop. So everybody printed a business card, and then somebody would come and teach something else. And by the time I started working there as a studio director, I would sort of figure out the next thing I needed to learn, and I'd invite Kathy Walkup or somebody to come down and teach me. And she would be pregnant and sleeping on Kim Bear's floor, but it didn't matter, it was just we just kind of pulled on that community a lot, because there were a lot of women up there doing things, but it was a very different atmosphere, I think, than Los Angeles. because I think a lot of those women later when I talked to them later, they said things like, we felt like we couldn't be writers and publish our own work because there was such a strong writing community in San Francisco. And I felt like nobody was paying attention to what we were doing in Los Angeles, and there was nobody to tell us we couldn't do it, and we just did it. Now, I think that was really brilliant about the Women's Graphic Center, that Sheila could say, you can have an idea, produce a book, bind the book, distribute the book, and in the first workshop, everybody in that I wasn't in that workshop. I was incredibly jealous. Michelle was in that workshop. You could print a book. Everybody printed a book in an extension workshop. That's pretty amazing. After I got involved with the letterpress, I really started doing a series of poetry books of work by other people through a National Endowment for the Arts grant. And I used the studio as my own studio. Finally, it became obvious that I needed my own studio somewhere else because I was taking up so much space. And as you said, I was practically living there, and I couldn't live there anymore. So I did that. But I was publishing books, poetry books, and then I decided I had to make a decision about what I was going to do, that I had to choose. So I started doing more artist book kinds of things. And Sue encouraged me she said I had to go make a liaison with Women's Studio Workshop. And I think I went kicking and screaming because I just had so much work to do, and I just never, I didn't go on vacations very much anywhere. And I really didn't want to go, but I ended up going and making a book there. And it was just really another important milestone. And I still have connections with them. I've gone there to teach recently, and I send people there. And so it was a time when we all lived on almost no money, but there was also a lot of money flowing around to do projects if you knew how to write grants and do things like that. And it was really exciting. Cindy Marsh came as a teacher. She had a printing degree from RIT, which I think was very attractive to Sheila, Rochester Institute of Technology. And Cindy came and started teaching offset printing. We had a class. Everybody was so busy, the only time we could have class was all day on Sunday. So we had this mega class that lasted all day on Sunday for weeks and weeks. She was part of that. We became good friends and would be sitting out on the loading dock smoking cigarettes, talking about how our lives were going nowhere, what we were going to end up doing. I had a lot of fun with Cindy, and she's now teaching outside of Nashville. But her work was really exciting. She really used the offset press as if she were a painter, and she has a really lively, conceptual mind, and it was really fun to work at the Graphic Center with her. I think because I was a little older, or I don't know what it was, but I had been through graduate school. I had lived in a couple different parts of the country, and I felt like my future was going to be, teaching school somewhere in the Midwest or something. And I just didn't want to do that. And I kind of lived my life by thinking, well, if I can just do what I want for one more year, if I can just figure out how to do this for one more year. And this was such an exciting opportunity. There was no question. It's like if there were any way to get out here, I was going to do it. I had to borrow money from my aunt, to get out here. And it was a big deal. It was a big deal because there was nothing. And I sound like an old fogey when I say this, but it's like you can't understand what it was like. There were no books on women artists, none. There was nothing. There were no books on women's art history. There was nothing. So for us to sit in New Mexico and find all these, take contemporary art magazines and have slide services copy all these pictures that were mostly in black and white, and to look at them, to take the next step and to come here and to really work with people who were working in these areas, like Arlene Raven and Ruth Iskin and people at Immaculate Heart, and it was just phenomenal. And later, as I got more involved with art history and met people who'd been to Immaculate Heart, I really saw Corita Kent, Sister Corita, as being a real foremother of what we were doing, although Sheila's graphic sense, design sense was so much different than hers. I think it was pretty hard for Sheila to kind of look at that with the same eyes that I did it was just this really lively art. And she had a lot of people going through that program that she trained that went on to do things. So certainly I see that. I mean, a nun in this art program, doing these yearbooks about, nuns on camelback, on their trip to Egypt. And it was really exciting. And to another person taking her own life as a really serious thing to be documented, but having a lot of fun doing it. Michelle Court knew that Imogen Cunningham was still living and was in San Francisco. I would go out to bookstores and buy any kind of book on women artists that I could find, and I found an old book on Imogen Cunningham's work, which was probably one of 50 volumes that we had in the library. And I was going to San Francisco to interview for a job, and Michelle said, "Oh, while you're up there, call up Imogen Cunningham or something." And I did. I called her up and went over to her house, and it turned out to be her 92nd birthday, which I didn't know. And some woman came, I knew that because some neighbor came with flowers on her birthday, and it had turned out that 2 years before her 90th birthday, they'd had a Imogen Cunningham Day all over San Francisco, and it had been official celebration day. So I had told her we talked about the Women's Building, and she had agreed to have a show at the Women's Building, and I ended up going to her house and picking out 50 prints. And she would sit there in her chair and say, "How about this one?" And I'd say, "Yeah, we want that one." And of course everyone said yes to. And she was this wild woman that nobody heard much about. She was photographing her husband naked on Mount Rainier in something like 1910 or something, 12 or something. But she had raised her family and was tied down with that, and then became this matriarch of photography in San Francisco. So we were the first people to have an Imogen Cunningham show in Los Angeles. Michelle and I had to drill 200 holes in the cement wall, which I could have killed Michelle about, but we made it. It was really fun. Cindy did a beautiful poster. It totally changed my work. I'm still teaching, and I think a lot of what I learned at the Women's Building, especially about feminist education, really is a part of the way I teach, and it's just still very much with me. And I feel like I was able to connect to some of my personal history, and of course I came from Kentucky, where I was surrounded by people who told stories all the time. The whole oral tradition was so strong. Both my parents, it just was constant storytelling about family things. And I was able to figure out a way to make that into some kind of artwork that hopefully is more universal than just Susan King. So I feel that's been a big part of my work, and I really loved making books that were inexpensive, that could go out and be my presence in the world. Because I'm a shy person, I don't like to go do all that stuff. But the books could do that for me. And, this whole thing of circumventing the art system with these inexpensive books, which was very much a part of the ethos of what was going on at the Women's Graphic Center and with artist books in general then. One thing that Judy was brilliant at critiquing work. For all of her other qualities, she was just so brilliant at honing right in on what the work was about. And it was just stunning to see her do that. And she taught us to really look at work and just say in plain language what we saw there. And that's remarkable when you do that. I mean, it's so simple. It doesn't have to do with language. It doesn't have to do with anything except just saying what you see. And in teaching, I think I've been really successful at making a whole bonded group of people who feel safe to work together and to explore content. And it's not, nobody's doing performance art or anything. It's not totally wild, but it's like creating a safe place, sort of like a CR group almost, where people can explore material in a non-judgmental setting and critique each other's work. And it's been very successful for me. And I feel like I'm helping people make work that's really their work. And that's one thing I was hoping to get from the Women's Building, and one thing that I did learn, although I'm not sure I could have articulated that all those years ago.